Hello everyone, Greg from the Game Fanatics here with comic author Greg Rucka, who is currently writing Veil for Dark Horse. Rucka is known for series including Gotham Central, Queen and Country, and my personal favorite, Batwoman. We'll be talking about Veil as well as a few other series he's currently working on, including Lazarus, Cyclops, and a few others. And I will inevitably ask him about Batwomanology because I'm me. Without further ado, Greg Rucka.
Hello.
Hello, Greg. This is Greg from the Game Fanatics. How are you doing today?
All right. How are you, Greg?
All right. I just want to say it's an honor. I've been a big fan of your work for quite a while, so it's
That's very flattering.
it's a privilege speaking with you today. So right now on the shelves, you've got quite a number of books that are currently you're working on, right? Veil, Cyclops, Lazarus. Any other ones that I'm missing?
Stumptown will be back in September.
Okay, I was going to ask you about that. I love Stumptown, so I'm glad to hear that. So.
And then there's a webcomic I've been doing for about 3 years with Rick Burchett and Eric Newsom called Lady Saber.
Okay.
We did a Kickstarter for that.
Okay. So let's talk about Veil first. I just finished rereading the issue 3 prior to this, so how would you describe Veil to someone who has not quite read it yet? It's a little unusual, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, you're asking a question that's been giving all of us involved nothing but trouble since the first of the book. We don't know how to describe it. I think, the most blandly commercial description is that it is a horror story surrounding a mysterious young woman who is given the name / takes the name Veil. But that's not really very helpful as a description.
Right.
It is, most of the stuff that I write tends to be stories that come out of, everything's very character-driven for me. And while Veil is a very character-driven work, the thing that really marks it as a departure for me in, I think, 2 significant fashions is that in the first instance, it is a horror book,
right.
which I'm not really known for.
Yeah, the thing that reminded me most of was Brubaker's Fatale a little bit. So
yeah, but Ed has really crafted himself into a master of modern noir.
Mm-hmm.
And I do not count myself in that number.
It's good. It's pretty good.
Oh no! I mean, I don't. I'm not. Trust me, it's not false modesty.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that Ed has very consciously schooled himself in noir in ways that I'm just not interested in learning.
Sure.
He is. If I had a question about noir, I'd turn to Ed Brubaker.
Sure.
All right. Yeah. He is an authority in the same way that if I have a question about, methods of visual storytelling, I would turn to Matt Fraction,
Right. And a question about stem cells, you go to Warren Ellis. So.
Exactly, as has been written.
Yes.
So I mean, that's element one, is that it's horror and that it's of a particular brand of horror that I have always found fascinating. I'm not a big slasher guy. I don't mind the gore. But if I'm going to get gore, I prefer it to be Silence of the Lambs rather than Friday the 13th.
Okay.
What is always the kinds of stories I've always found incredibly compelling are the Lovecraftian stories of inevitability, and
right.
I think running parallel to that, plays like Dr. Faust, like Faust. Stories like The Omen, is it The Ninth Gate, the Polanski film, things like that. I like stories where it's almost been written before you see page 1, in the sense that this is the way it's going to roll out. That because that kind of horror, that kind of, the horror of it to me is the inevitability.
Right.
And the powerlessness in the face of frankly, evil, as a capital E force. Yes. So that's one element. And then the other element that makes it a departure is, as I said, I tend to always start with character and then go from there. And with Veil, I had the character for a very, very long time, but I didn't have the story. And the story came out pretty much as a thematic expression. And that's not to say that in my other works I'm not actively dealing with theme, because I fancy myself a writer who tries to elevate things. But one of the things that's absolutely going on in Veil is that there is a huge metaphor at work. I've said elsewhere that the book fails the Bechdel test on every possible level. She's the only female character who really speaks. There's like one other woman in issue 2 who's a waitress. Mm-hmm. All the other women you see tend to be background characters in street scenes. And that's very deliberate. This is a story in large part about this woman sort of manifesting very much as a tableau, as a blank slate, and how the men she interacts with, almost to a one, seek to possess, covet, abuse, control, possess her, and in that the nature of horror is such that it sort of allows us to take that to an allegorical extreme. Right. But like I say, you talk about it like that. That's not about a plot,
Right. That's okay. This is what I want to convey. How do I convey that aspect then?
So what's it about? It's about this woman who appears out of nowhere one day, stark naked, with barely any language, and immediately finds herself sort of, surrounded by these guys who want her in various ways. And the effect, and they're not necessarily successful, I should hasten to add. This is not, I'm not a fan of rapey. That's not what this is. But it's what they turn her into. That's what the story is. They turn her into a monster. Now, turning her into a monster, I had a professor way back in college who used to send us, we were doing Shakespeare, and he would send us to the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary, once a week with certain words in the whatever play we had been reading to look up. And he would say, you need to understand what the word means in its original form. You need to know what the word meant when Shakespeare wrote it, as opposed to what we use it as now.
With the context of the original intent.
Exactly. And one of the words I remember, we were reading The Tempest, and it was monster. It was monstrous, as used to describe Caliban. And monstrous does not have a negative connotation in its initial usage. It means wondrous. It means something that is remarkable and awe-inspiring. And we've obviously lost that when we talk about monsters.
Right.
We make creepy and scary. But I think
that sort of thing.
Yeah. But I think one of the things that's going on absolutely with Vale, right, is that she is monstrous in every possible definition of the world. That she is both wondrous and terrifying.
Right.
So
yeah.
And if you got to the end of 3, you see.
Right.
4, which is obviously not out yet, goes a great length to explaining in story, exactly what's happened here, who she is.
Okay.
And eventually you'll understand what the rats are too. So
I was going to ask with that, rats, really? Rats? I mean, you don't see too many rats in comics because most people are kind of, creeped out by them. So
yeah. Yeah.
So,
but if you think about what a rat is, and what a rat does, what a rat can do, what a wonderful, wonderful messenger.
As far as like a carrier.
Exactly. I mean, this is a creature that is nigh unkillable, can get anywhere, right? Mm-hmm. And then, of course, man, one of the rats. There are two in the script. There are 2 named rats. Nobody ever says this is Bob the rat and this is Ted the rat. But there are 2 rats, and one of them is the rat that Cormac captures and and soaks in blood and
Right.
then sends off after Vale. And then there's the other rat that's sort of been sticking with Vale.
Mm-hmm.
And each of them have very specific agendas. And one of them is one of them is not simply a rat that has been soaked in blood. Let's put it that way. The other one is a rat that is literally being controlled. And
Great, rats with agendas. Great, that's what we need.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's rat with an agenda. And in 4, you actually get to learn the rat's agenda, which is awesome, I think. I love the pages Tony has been turning in on this, I think. If you thought the rats were creepy before, issue 4, you're going to be like, okay, that's a little
Yeah, well, let's talk about the artwork, because I haven't seen any work from Tony before, but it's a very striking visual style.
Yes.
With the shading and all that. Especially that first cover where because for a long time all we saw was the first cover of her, lying in the pile of rats naked. Like, okay, what is this book? It's Greg Rucka. I'm gonna get it.
It's Willard.
No, I mean, like, honestly, my local comic store knows if you're on a book, get it for me. So, all right, I'll give it a chance. It looks really weird, more than usual, but I'll give it a chance. So, no, the art has been incredible. Like, in the last issue, the blood spirals and everything was like, wow, that's something there. So
yeah, no, he is phenomenal. I couldn't be more delighted working with Tony. I mean, in all sincerity, and I had never seen his work before. Scott Alley at Dark Horse put his pages in front of me, and what I saw initially, his sample pages that Scott put in front of me, I was like, these are terrific. This is perfect because there's a lightness to touch, and he's not so hyper realistic that I was concerned, especially in that first issue. Vale spends a lot of time naked,
right?
And I really didn't want I didn't want it to be a spanking book. It needed to be. You had to understand that yes, she's naked. Yes, she's beautiful, but that it couldn't be objectifying.
Sure.
And at the same time, the representation needed to be objective, right?
Okay.
There needed to be a certain documentary feel to how the panels were composed, and I kind of tried to hedge my bets, going, well, if it's a little cartoony and that fails, if the artist can't capture that objectivity, then at least it won't be hyper realistic. And then Tony came back with these pages that, number one, looked nothing like the original samples. I mean, nothing like what I thought we'd be getting. But 2, he absolutely nailed my concerns. I mean, he understood them, and I think that it's one of the things that we really wanted very actively in the book was a sense of what is an objective shot, what's the documentary shot, and then what's the subjective shot, what's the POV shot, so that the reader is privy to both. The reader is privy to seeing her in a very uninflected context, right? But individuals in the story, when they look at her, are seeing her in a very inflected context. Yeah.
So use both the reader, but as well as the characters and how the views affect her and the other characters.
Yeah, and one of the things about another thing about Tony's art is that you don't actually look at it and go, this. It does not look at first like it is an art style is going to lend itself to subtlety, and yet his storytelling is exceptionally subtle in places. And I love that. If you look at Lazarus, for instance, one of the reasons I've always loved working with Michael Lark is that he allows me to take really quiet moments and play with them, and Michael is a master of that subtlety. And Michael is also a master of, I really think the best description of Michael Lark's work is that it's photojournalistic.
Yeah, I can see that, yeah.
You look at the way he presents material, and again, he doesn't really inflect it. He doesn't go for these really dynamic angles. What he does is he composes the scene, and it's the difference between... I'm trying to think. It's the difference between seeing a movie shot by, Michael Bay or shot by a Stanley Kubrick. Lark is much more Kubrickian, if that's a word. He sets the camera, he composes the shot, he's got a visual rhythm, but he doesn't actually play a lot of camera tricks, and he's not really worried about quick edits or crazy angles or, dolly zooms or whatnot.
Sure.
And that suits me much more, frankly. That's hand in glove with me.
Sure. So let's talk about Lazarus for a bit. So Lazarus is a...
Yeah, it was an easy segue.
Yeah, it was a great segue. Thank you. A dystopian story, which, again, I love in general. I've been a fan of the Wasteland type stuff for a while.
And you're talking about Anthony's stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book.
So, and with this character who, when we first see her, she's just been shot in the head, right?
Yeah.
So, first page. So,
well, actually, no, she wasn't shot in the head. The cover is her with the bullet hole.
That's right. That's the cover. Then that was the promo poster. That's right.
Yeah, but when we first meet her, she's been shot 3 times in the chest, and pretty much screwed up, and is, for all intents and purposes, dead. The reason that I actually will quibble about the headshot, right? We haven't seen that. Is I have a scene written.
Okay.
It's in my Lazarus file of what happens when she does get shot in the head.
Okay.
We haven't seen that yet. And I'm actually looking forward to one day sharing that scene with the world. But yeah, I mean, the deal with Forever, right, our main character, is that she has been heavily genetically modified. She has basically been built from the ground up. And she has been built for a purpose, and that purpose is to kill the enemies of her family and to survive. And to survive means that you can shoot her 3 times in the chest, and she'll fall down, but she will get up again, and then she will get you. And a lot of that science surrounding that is based... The initial conceit of that regenerative power is... out there, but it is all built on actual emerging science. I mean, the science fiction aspects of the book, I feel, are very hard science. And that we're not that far from some of the levels of genetic engineering we're seeing with her. And in some places we already have it. The use of stem cells, or induced pluripotent stem cells, which are basically created stem cells that can be used to replicate just about anything in the body. And then if you tie that with extensive genetic modification, you end up with a creation that, is going to be stronger and faster and hardier, and maybe we'll be able to shift its vision into the infrared spectrum or the ultraviolet. Maybe remarkably resistant to various forms of radiation. May be able to breathe underwater. May be able to have a heightened response and reaction time. And then we're not even talking about what we can do to the brain. I mean, and we live in an era right now of smart drugs where there are students regularly taking pharmaceuticals to increase their brain capacity, to be smarter. And if you can do that, then...
How far can I go beyond that? Then?
Exactly. And it's not that impossible to posit a future where, with the resources, and since in this world the family that Forever is from has all the resources,
right?
That it would not be impossible to create a genetic sequence inserted into an individual that, when triggered, produces the same results as some of these pharmaceuticals, right? Because what are pharmaceuticals? Pharmaceuticals are combinations of chemicals, which are strings of, they're chemical strings that affect our bodies in certain ways. Well, if you can do that, you're already working with the raw material. So if you can create it,
So transmute those chemicals in the right order to create a desired effect.
Yeah. The question, of course, is how many times did they get it wrong before they got it right?
Right.
Ever. You know, I'm reminded of that scene in the fourth Aliens movie when Ripley walks into the clone room and sees all the failed attempts. You know, and there's a room like that somewhere that Forever has never seen.
Oh,
and that they do not want her to see.
that would probably cause some trauma. I believe. So beyond with Lazarus, you have this character. They also have this world you create all around it. This wholly different United States, and where it's carved out among the elite of the elite, and everyone else, as you call them, waste.
Yeah. So. The quick description of the world, right? We talk about it as a dystopian future. The reason it's a dystopian future is that there was an Armageddon. There was an apocalypse, but the apocalypse wasn't, disease, and it wasn't war, and it wasn't really famine, though famine was a part of it. It was economic. It was that we had a tipping point where the haves and the have-nots became so polarized that the haves, are this microscopic portion of the global population, and they now own everything. And when they own everything, money loses any meaning.
Right.
Because there's nothing for them to buy. So it's the haves and the have-nots. And in the face of that, the world sort of reverts to feudalism. And in Lazarus, that feudalism is sort of represented as there are 16 royal families that have carved up the planet. And as with all things greed, they are desperate to hold what they have and to get a little more, or a lot more. So it's an ugly, ugly future. I mean, there's no
some of those
place
ugly
about
futures are great grounds for awesome stories. So, no, Lazarus, that was the one with the preview. It was like, Greg's work us around a dystopian future. I want to read this. This looks awesome. And at the end, like I said, that first couple of pages, like, all right, so what's going on with her? What's going on? She's got a sword. She take bullets. All right, so I'm really excited to see where this one. Now Lazarus isn't ongoing, right? That'll be going.
Yes, it is. Lazarus. Okay. I mean, it's a finite ongoing. There is an end, but that end is many years away.
Sure. And Veil, was Veil a mini, or is that?
Veil is a 5-issue mini, but it is meant to be the first of multiples.
Okay, so kind of like seasons or so.
Yeah, that's a very good. I think that's a very good descriptor of it. Okay. So that these first 5 issues of Veil are, this is the beginning,
right?
It's the origin story.
Sure.
At the end of issue 5, she is in a place where she will continue. And then I actually know what I want to do in the second one. So,
cool.
And Scott's already been like, all right, we're going to do this. It's like,
awesome.
Hey, you got to slow down, man. I'm writing a lot of stuff. Let me catch my breath.
Right. And there's another book from Marvel, Cyclops.
Yes, that little company. That
little company.
Unheard of.
No one's heard of
Marvel.
Now, I love X-Men. They're kind of my core, my comic pull list. However, I don't like Cyclops. I've always been a Nightcrawler and Wolverine type fan.
Yeah, you're not alone in that.
But I loved your book.
Thank you.
Explain.
I will explain. This is the explanation, and I offer this to all people out there who are like, I don't like Cyclops. To which I say, there's some very good reasons to not like Cyclops. I'm not going to argue whether you should or not. I will say that what's different here is that this isn't that Cyclops.
Right, exactly.
This is the 16-year-old Cyclops who still who has a future.
Right.
And as a result of that, gets to be 16 with everything that entails. And I think one of the reasons that people were surprised by issue 1, and in particular were surprised that they liked him, is that they understood him.
Yeah.
They were like, oh, God, I remember what 16 was like and not knowing what love was and feeling awkward and displaced. And if you think about 16-year-old Scott, I mean, oh, my God, what a horrible situation.
It's terrible.
It really is. It's just a never-ending kick in the teeth for him. You're 8 years old, and your mom says, well, the plane's going down. Here's the one parachute. Don't drop your brother. Right? And shoves you. That's the start, man.
8 years old.
Yeah. And if that doesn't give you PTSD, given the next 8 years, in fostering orphanage, hell.
Yes.
Oh, and by the way, you're a mutant, and we hate mutants.
Right, exactly.
Exactly. So, and your mutation, incidentally,
it sucks.
it absolutely sucks. Your mutation is a mutation that you cannot get away from, right?
No.
Can't hide it. Logan can walk down the street.
Right.
And nobody's going to go, mutant! Right. But Nightcrawler, Scott, Beast, they're all in this class where they are visually marked as different.
Right. If this was Fables, they would be on the farm.
You got it. And so so here's Scott, and then finally, he goes through all this hell, and he meets Xavier, and he's at a school, and there are other mutants, and there aren't a lot of them, but there's this core group, and there's this really pretty girl, and she's a mutant too, right?
Exactly.
So, and if everybody in that class is not crushed out on Jean,
which they all totally are.
Well, that's exactly it. It's simply on the basis of this. You take four, is it four? It's what? Scott, Bobby, Hank, and Warren.
Warren, yeah.
Yeah. So you take these four adolescent boys, and they're all ostensibly straight, and you put them in a room with the pretty redhead. Not one of them isn't going to think that she is the greatest thing to come along since sliced bread. I mean, they're all going to be like, oh my gosh, she's so pretty. All right? So now you've got, this is normal, right? I have stability. I have a place. This could be good. Oh my God, she's gorgeous and so smart, and I think I love her. And yoink, they get yanked into their future.
By their future selves.
Exactly. And, well, and future Hank says, I know I did a really, really horrible thing, but here's why. And by the way, Scott, that's what you turn into. Standing next to Magneto? That's you. That Scott doesn't immediately, the vein on his temple doesn't immediately just burst in aneurysm is remarkable. And then let's compound it, right? Then, by the way, you married Jean and she died, and you have kids, and she came back, and she died, and then in the midst of all this, we're going into space because Jean might one day be this horrible monster, and there are aliens, and they're going to put her on trial. Oh, and by the way, Scott, your dad, here he is. He's still alive. So your 16-year-old Scott,
yes,
you get back to Earth after all that. Who wouldn't be like, hey, you know what, guys? I'm going to take a couple weeks and go with my dad.
And just, trying to figure this...
if nothing else, I need to get my head on straight. That's my dad, man. That's my dad. And, he's been dead to me for 8 years. Mm-hmm. That's... So, what the book... And I do think that's why the book worked. I think that issue 1 works because if you can't empathize with where Scott is... You're a pretty cool human being.
Yeah.
And then you add to that Dad is a combination of Han Solo and the Dread Pirate Roberts.
A.K.A. the coolest person ever.
Exactly. And that we were being honest. That we were trying to be at least emotionally honest in the fantasy of it. And that's the other problem I think that Scott has suffered from is that he has been the stick in the mud for a really, really long time. Mm-hmm. Because being the serious guy, standing next to, say, Wolverine, who is the serious guy who breaks all the rules.
Right.
Scott knows he's not cool. And, Scott is Richie Cunningham to the Fawns. To Logan. It is. I mean, that's that construct.
That's a great analogy. I hadn't thought about that. That is a great analogy.
But the thing you got to remember, going way back to Happy Days, is that, Richie was always a good guy.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
Richie was never... And that's one of the reasons that I love Scott, is that, we're in an era right now where, in comics in particular, the ideas of heroism, the root ideas of what these books are, right? Mm-hmm. Which is people trying to be their best selves, to do the right thing in circumstances that do not often reward that, or in the case of the Marvel Universe, frequently punish you for doing it. And yet still you persist in trying to be the best you and trying to help others and trying to be heroic, right? That's not a popular flavor right now. Over at DC, it's pretty much house mandate that hero is not cool.
Exactly.
Anti-hero is now cool, right?
Yeah.
But Superman is supposed to be a dick, right? Because the idea that Superman wouldn't be, we can't sell those books. And I fundamentally reject that.
Yeah.
I absolutely and fundamentally reject that. And one of the things that's going on very actively with Scott is that he wants to be a good guy. And having been shown a vision of his future where he believes, 16-year-old Scott believes, that future version is definitively not a good guy, that's compelling drama. I mean, that's compelling drama. And
at
so
16.
Yeah. And so we've got this book now, right, where his 16-year-old Scott, he's in space with his cool dad, right? And most kids get to 16 and they can resent their fathers, because dad is not cool. For Scott, he's looking at his dad being like, no, he's the cool one. I'm not cool. I mean, I know I'm not cool, but my dad's cool. This is a chance for Scott to, I don't even want to say redefine himself, but sort of find himself.
Right.
I don't ever want him to lose that sense of, there's a quiet nobility in him, in his insistence that there's a right way. And I think one of the things that's most painful about looking at older Scott is that Scott has abdicated that. Older Cyclops has lost that he has clearly reached a point where he says there isn't a way to do this that is consistent with that moral vision I had as a young man.
Right.
I have to, it's the terrorist argument, or it's the in another way to put it, it's the Le Carré sort of Cold War Spy Who Came In From the Cold argument, which is, to fight the enemy, we cannot be less ruthless than our enemy. And older Cyclops is standing next to Magneto for a reason, right?
Right.
And younger Cyclops, my Scott, still is like, no, we don't do that. We can't do that. We do that, and we are everything they fear.
Right.
And there's you can make arguments for both.
Right.
So
that's exactly why, like I said, not a Cyclops fan, but your book was just so compelling, and it was fun. I mean, for me, it was fun, which I think a lot of the books kind of, on both sides, Marvel DC, get a little, serious and dark. Like, I just want to have some fun. I want to see guys, floating spaceships, hijacking stuff, Yeah.
So. Well, and it I mean, we're talking the X-Men, so if there isn't angst in the X-Men, something really, really wrong. It is maybe the greatest soap opera in the history of mainstream comics.
Oh, yeah.
But I will also say, so, I mean, one of the things we get out of Cyclops is we remove him from that soap opera. So he's got plenty of angst on his own. He doesn't need anybody else's. That's number one. And I think the other thing, and I have no hesitation about this, is that Russell Dowderman drew a book that looks like a fun space fantasy about 16-year-old and his cool dad and the awesome aliens on this spaceship. And it's wonderful and it's exciting. And there is a sense when you read Cyclops 1, it kind of feels like when the first time you saw the original Star Wars.
Right.
You know? And, I mean, between what Russell did and what Chris Sotomayor did on colors, I mean, they killed it. They absolutely killed it.
Yeah, I actually met Russell at a C2E2 this year. Because he did the last issue of Nightwing with Kyle Higgins, so he was right next to him, like, oh, then they pick up Cyclops. Hey, I met that guy. I know that guy. So he was super nice.
It's funny. He and I have yet to actually speak in person, and we haven't met. We've exchanged emails. Everything's by email these days. But oh my God, I mean, he so got it from the word go.
Yeah.
And one of the things when we were initially corresponding, I was like, there are two things that I want. These are the two things that I'm going to ask you for. The first is I want Scott to look like he's 16. I want him to be, he can be in incredible shape, but he needs to have the body of a 16-year-old. He needs to be a little awkward and a little bony.
A little gangly. So.
Exactly. Because we can't forget his age. And the second thing is, we're in space. Go crazy. I mean, make it as nutty and wacky and wonderful as you can. And he wrote back and he said, no problem. You guys are gonna, you're gonna see issue 2, and they visit this planet called Erzit. And I had descriptions in the script of the, Scott and his father walking through the city streets. And I'm like, so maybe this kind of alien, and this alien's going to be important. We need this. And then just go nuts. And I got pages back, and it's like, it's going nuts. Because one of the wonderful things about what Marvel has done with their space stories is that they have made Marvel Galaxy populous, and defined in certain areas, but they've also conveyed, I think, really effectively how big it is and how much we haven't seen.
Yeah, so there's plenty of room for teams like yourself and Russell to do whatever you want, completely new planets and galaxies and alien races that we've never seen before because it hadn't been thought of yet. So
that's exactly it. So instead of us going, oh, look, Skrulls and the Shi'ar.
Right.
We get to say, okay, yeah, you're going to see a Skrull, you're going to see Shi'ar, but we're also going to see things you've never seen. Because I want it to be abundant with life. And there's another element to that, actually, that hasn't I haven't figured out the appropriate way to thread it into the script. But one of the things that I kind of wanted to play with, again, thematically, we're back to that word, is that Scott is now in an environment and with a group of people, right, the Starjammers, but specifically his dad,
right,
who epitomize tolerance and respect for diversity.
Right.
You cannot survive in this galaxy if you don't do that, right? Otherwise, you're at war with everybody all the time. And putting Scott in a place where the fact that he's a mutant does not matter.
Does not matter at all.
Exactly. And to be walking with a dad who's like, you're a mutant, if you're a mutant, if you're gay, none of this matters, man. It's life. You can't, if that's your hang-up, you have other problems. And for Scott to actually be in that kind of non-judgmental space, where he can actually walk down a street, and if somebody has a problem with him, it's not because he's a mutant. It's going to be because he's human or he did something culturally inappropriate. Yeah, but it's not going to be because you're a mutant.
Right. I mean, technically he's human for all intents and purposes.
Yeah. I mean, he meets any other race he meets. They don't look at him and go, "Oh, that's a mutant human."
You're right.
He's human. So.
Yeah, I mean, just think of the composition of the Starjammers themselves. I mean, there's no two of the same race in that small group alone, let alone the rest of the galaxy.
And one of them is an insect. One of them is a skunk cat lady. One of them is sort of a reptilioid thing. I mean, one of them is cybernetic Shi'ar. I mean? It's just it's across the board. So yeah, it's not an environment where somebody's going to be like, "You're the problem." By being. If you're a problem, it's because of what you did or didn't do.
Right. So, which is it's a polar opposite thematic from most of the X books out there.
Exactly. And now going back to the damage that my Scott, young Scott has had to endure, and then you put him in that environment, that is going to be ideally a healing and a growth environment. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the goal. Because I really think he's awesome. Mm-hmm. And I've talked to Bendis about this, because I was like, these are your toys, man. You're going to want them back. And he was like, yeah, eventually. I said, well, we have to talk about the state. What do you want when Scott comes back? What is it to be? And we had a conversation about that, and I was delighted to leave that conversation going, we are on the same page.
Good.
That we both want for this Scott the exact same thing. And it's going to be kind of awesome. I mean, if I can pull it off, I think people who do not like Scott are going to have to reevaluate their feelings. I think they're going to be like, hey, you know what? He's kind of awesome. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I really do. There's another part of me that my personal agenda here is to say, hey, you know what? Heroes, they're okay. It's good. Mm-hmm. Heroism is a good thing. There you are.
Yeah, I was kind of reminds I picked up the Jeff Johns JSA Omni last week, and it's just completely different than anything I've read before. Because I started reading comics about 10 years ago or so that was all new to me. Like, these guys are just these classics. They're wearing the Tyson capes and they're doing good deeds. No question about it. It's very kind of refreshing.
It is, and it's an interesting shift to me, mm-hmm. and I think it's a misreading of the market. Honestly, I think that we tend to want in our entertainment the opposite of what we are seeing in the world, for the nature of escapism. One of the reasons that horror had such a huge boom prior to 9/11 is that things looked really good and rosy.
Right.
And I think right now, we're still in an economic hellhole. We're still living in a world of incredible uncertainty. We're eyeing Eastern Europe warily. We worry about North Korea. We worry about Iran. We worry. The horror stories of Boko Haram and Al Shabaab. There's a reason that this information is coming at us all the time, and you produce a movie like Captain America: Winter Soldier in the midst of that, which is absolutely a movie about heroism.
Mm-hmm. It totally is.
You look at that final sequence, spoilers, between, Cap and the Winter Soldier, and it is such a beautiful, dramatic choice that his agenda is, I will complete my mission, and I will fight you to the point that I can complete my mission. And once I have completed the mission, I'm done. I will not strike you. Mm-hmm. As a metaphor, I think never mind just the literal heroism of that.
Right.
As a metaphor for what I think, speaking as an American, we want our country to be, that's a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to do what I set out to do and the thing I set out to do is incidentally to save millions upon millions of people. Having accomplished that, I'll take the beating. I'll take the beating and I won't protest. That's poetic.
It
is. To me is really something else. So, I want to bring. I want to see more of that. I want, So my Scott, he's a 16-year-old. He's capable of doing the stupid things 16-year-olds do. He's not a dick. I'm not going to let him be a dick.
Excellent.
So.
Yeah. So now something else I want to talk to you about is you are known for writing very strong female characters. You've written quite a number over the years.
Yes, or as I like to think of them, characters.
Exactly. It's kind of sad that they label that way, but you have written a great number of them. And one I wanted to ask you about specifically was my personal favorite is your run with Batwoman, yours and J.H. Williams. I got into DC long after I got Marvel, and that was one book that I just kind of picked off the shelf. Not only the character, but the cover was beautiful.
Yes.
And it still is one of my absolute favorite books. I mean, your story of her combined with GH's art is just brilliant. Now, you created her, right, during the 52? Did you create Kate Kane?
I never know how to answer that.
Yeah.
This Kate Kane, the Kate Kane that is the current Batwoman, I created with Michael Siglain, who was editing, and with JH.
Mm-hmm.
But that Kate Kane has its genetic roots in the work that Devin Grayson was doing prior to that.
Okay.
Before 52 started, Devin had been developing a Batwoman at Paul Levitz's request. And there had been some back and forth. I think she had done a couple proposals. Mm. And then what happened was there was a New York Times story as 52 was getting underway about diversity in the DCU. And one of the things that was talked about in that article was this quote-unquote new lesbian Batwoman. And she was described as a lipstick lesbian. And that got a whole lot of attention. And one thing led to another, and I ended up, we were told she needed to appear in 52. Mm-hmm. And I sort of had, as we had sort of divvied up the workload and the characters we were working with, I was responsible really for what was going on in Gotham.
Okay.
Because I was writing the Montoya story.
Right.
And there was a logical point of connection in the soap opera that is comics.
Right.
That a Renee Montoya lesbian might have known a Kate Kane lesbian. Mm. Which is not to say there are only 3 lesbians in the universe, which is, trust me, I know how it looked. But in that soap opera sense, following Renee's story, it made sense to connect it that way.
To tie this character in via that mechanism.
Yeah. What we ended up writing in 52 was still kind of proto-Batwoman.
Right.
Because I was operating at that point for much of 52 on the basis that this was still a project Devin was going to do.
Sure.
And by the end of 52, it had been made clear to me that Devin wasn't going to do it for reasons that I still do not understand. And that they wanted me to do a Batwoman book. And the very first thing you have to do when you do that is try to figure out the origin.
Right.
And I had been working sort of loosely off this idea of an origin that Devin had been working on in 52. And post-52, when we started on the series, definitely went my own way with it.
Right.
We were in development on that for 3 years, and there was all sorts of roadblocks and hiccups and, K barriers and arguments as to when the book would come out, as to if the book would come out, as to why the book should come out, until finally DC bit the bullet and said, well, we'll do it in Detective Comics. And that was the initial story. Right. But, everything that is Kate, the current iteration of Kate, at least as I left her when I left DC, that's the result of my work with Jim and with Mike Siglain. So.
Right, yeah. 'Cause the Kate in 52 is a bit different than in the Elegy, because it was definitely more fleshed out. The mannerisms are different. The whole army backstory, which is probably one of my favorite parts. I was trying to recall, think of any other that kind of vigilantes. From the Punisher type thing. They actually had this well-grounded army. Training that would make sense that they could do these type of Black Ops feats type of things.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I wanted very much. I thought of Kate as. And I don't. This is one of the things I really, really, really don't like that they're doing in the New 52. By the way, I like that Kate was a second generation Bat hero, or even third generation. Right? If the first generation is Batman and Robin and Nightwing, Right. And then the second generation are like Huntress and Batgirl.
Right, Oracle.
And later iterations like the Tim Drake Robin.
Right, the Red Robin, yeah.
Right.
Titans. So.
These are all characters. Spoiler is a good example. Those are all characters that are related to Batman by direct contact. And I really wanted the idea of Kate doesn't care about Batman.
Right.
She could care less what he thinks. She isn't related to him. She isn't related to any of that group. She is in pursuit of the ideology. She follows the flag, not man. And I hate the fact that they are pushing her towards following the man.
Me too.
I think that is a stupid thing to do. I think making her related to him is stupid. I think it is lazy and bullshit comic book storytelling. In all sincerity, I think it defeats the whole purpose. That for her, the moment was seeing him as a symbol.
Right, an icon.
Yeah, and going, I'm going to enlist. Right. That's what she did. She said, I have found a way to serve. I'm enlisting.
That was such a great moment. That was such a great and beautiful moment in that book. Yeah, no, I totally agree. This is, something me and my friends, talk about is, new DC versus, old DC. Because I started reading DC around when the New 52 started because I was mostly Marvel Image before then. Like, okay, this is interesting. But the more I go back to the old, this is so much better. This is, the choices that they're making are just asinine. And there is one event that happened a while back I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
Was when J.H. and Ian Blackman walked off the book.
Yeah.
Did he talk to you about that? Did you have any thoughts on that?
Well, Jim and I talk, and so when it happened, I definitely got his side of it.
Yeah.
I think, look, how to put it?
Yeah, if you want to go off the record, that's fine.
No, I mean, look, I'm not. My problem in talking about anything with Kate is that she's not mine.
Right.
And so, if Mark and Draco wants to, I don't know, turn her into a Doberman, or whatnot, then, I don't have any say in it.
Right.
And it's absolutely his right to do whatever DC tells him to do.
Right.
And I think a lot of books at DC, with few examples, or a few exceptions, are being written the way they've been told they should be written.
That's fine. My friends and I have said the exact same thing. It's the editor's words through the creators, It's not the creators themselves.
And I think that just as a general rule, that's a mistake. I think if you're going to do that, then why bother hiring creators?
Yeah, I mean, they have talent there,
They have enormous talent there.
Let the talented people do the things they're talented at.
Right.
So.
And let them sink or swim on the basis of it. But that's certainly no longer what DC is interested in doing, and to, frankly, a lesser extent, Marvel, because with the success of films on both ends, these are now no longer publishing houses, they're IP houses.
Right.
And their job is to maintain the brands. And for that reason, there's, I think, a very merchandising-heavy aspect and marketing-heavy aspect. They're not interested in telling a good story. They're interested in making sure the product is out there and people are seeing it, and that they're able to be really, really loud about the product.
Sounds like something Kirkman would say.
Well, but look, I mean,
it's true. No, it's definitely true.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
Before, you can say what you will about Paul Levitz, but one of the things that Levitz did very, very well was he protected DC Comics from Warner Brothers, and in so doing, was able to sort of let the comics be, right? Mm-hmm. Now the comics are, for both Warner Brothers and for ABC Disney, they're a division that is being monitored. And those books have to sell a certain amount, they have to make a certain amount of money, and they have to do and support certain agendas. Mm-hmm. That's what it's about. And when you do that, then of course you're taking away creative freedom. And I know for a fact that a lot of the decisions surrounding the New 52 were made on the basis of market research that gave them the answers they wanted. That told them only men 18 through 34 are buying your comics.
Jeez. I think Gail Simone has something to say about that.
Well, but that was also the answer they wanted when they commissioned the study.
Right.
And of course they were going to get that. You know, you can read the data however you like. And I think for large part you can see it. When you know that and you look at the decisions they've made over the last 3 years at DC in particular, all of a sudden it makes perfect sense. Right? All of a sudden you're like, well, of course.
Right.
It's a pity to me because one of the things that made DC wonderful for me for a time, and one of the reasons that I think a lot of really good work came out of DC for a time, was there was an era of about 3 years where in-house the edict was story comes first. Story comes first. Story comes first. Tell a good story. Tell a good story, and we will sell it. And what's happened now is not story comes first. What happens now is, this has to be promoted a certain way. It's got to look a certain way. These are the brands. Maintain the brands.
Right. No, I mean, there's so many Bat books that are, other small titles we cancel and get another Bat book. So because it's Batman.
Oh, it sells.
Yeah.
I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for a comic buying audience that goes, "Oh man, this sucks," and yet still buys the books.
That's why I drop stuff all the time.
But I think that's kind of crucial. I think that especially with Image, with Oni, with Dark Horse, there are lots of publishers out there that are putting out some really, really good work that deserves your money and time and attention.
Definitely.
And I understand, completionist nature. I understand that I have 150 issues of Batman, and I don't want to have a gap in my run. All right, well, that's a decision, but don't pretend that you're not making that decision actively.
Right. You vote with your dollars.
So.
Yeah, you vote with your dollars.
Yeah.
Thank you again for Batwoman XLG. It's one of my favorite books. The combination of your story and Williams' art was just incredible.
I am so proud of that book, man. I'm always delighted when I hear people like it.
I picked it up, and I actually went on my way to look for the deluxe version, hoping get all the extra stuff in there because I just wanted more of it.
One day, I suspect they will, but right now, Jim was not in any way, shape, or form subtle about his needs for departing DC.
Right.
And he's working on the Sandman thing with Neil.
Neil freaking Gaiman? What?
Yeah. So, when that's done, I have a feeling that unless there's a large truck with a lot of money, Jim may be done with DC. I can't speak for him.
Right.
But he is, he's very passionate about what he believes. When we were doing Elegy, we would argue, and we would argue with each other about the story, and we would argue with Michael, and we would argue with DC all the time about what we needed to do, what we could do. There were a couple points in the development of Elegy where we were like, if this is a problem, we cut throats. We'll walk off it. You don't often have the opportunity, I think, in mainstream comics to work on a book that is going to matter to a portion of your audience. Mm-hmm. And we, three straight guys, we took our responsibility very, very seriously because we were three straight guys and we were aware of that. And we were just as aware that, there wasn't a woman working on this thing and there needed to be, there should have been. And for, any number of reasons, there wasn't. It was us. But We did not. It mattered that we do right by Kate.
Right.
And if there's something I feel I can say with some certainty, I think we did. So.
Yeah. No, I've lent the book out to many people, and they beg me for lending it because it's just such a gorgeous piece of art. So, and I have to say also I did like Rachel Maddow's introduction on.
Oh yeah, well that's yeah, that was kind of awesome.
Yeah, a little bit. So. I also she put in line there how she had given members of Congress copies of Queen and Country.
She sent me a note once, handwritten note, and it was on the back of a note that had been sent to her by a certain senator, thanking her for the QNC books. So she ain't lying.
Wow,
yeah,
that's really cool.
Yeah,
I mean, because I love Queen and Country. It's a great series. Was that your first series? Really, your first
it was certainly my first. It was certainly my first ongoing quote unquote creator owned. We did Whiteout before it,
right?
And I was already starting stuff up at DC when we got Queen and Country running. But Queen and Country had been a series that we'd been talking about almost from the get go at Oni. I mean, as soon as Whiteout was over, we were talking about Queen and Country.
Yeah.
Like Stumptown, Queen and Country is a love letter. It's a love letter to all the espionage stories that I grew up on. In particular, its DNA is firmly rooted in the Yorkshire television series The Sandbaggers, created by Ian McIntosh. And I've never made any bones about that. I had seen and read Le Carré, and I had, grown up on Bond, and I had read Dayton, and then I encountered this show, and I had never seen anything like it. I had just never seen a depiction of espionage that was at once able to negotiate sort of the excitement and suspense of, some of the over-the-top spy stuff, and yet ground it so firmly in the political realities and necessities of espionage. And I think that is the genius of the Sandbaggers, and I think that is certainly one of the things that I literally stole from for Queen and Country, was to never forget there was a political, there's always a political aspect to what's going on.
Right. The one thing to come to mind is the first novel where, I'm still working on the last two, but the first one where she goes out and kills her target. Then, the bystander has all these political backlash where she has to go on the run, for doing her job. So.
Yeah, and that the government is immediately willing to throw her over.
Right.
They're immediately willing to say, okay, right. And that's the other thing. I was talking to somebody else. I've been working on developing something else, and I was having a phone call with the woman I'm working with on it, and I was reminded of. I'm trying to remember who I have an old friend in the State Department, and I've known some people in various other positions, and it was explained to me at one point, and I really do think this is true. The first principle of government is the self-perpetuation of government. It isn't serving the people. It isn't protecting the national interests. It isn't educating the young or feeding the poor or having a big army. It is solely to perpetuate its own existence. Everything else is secondary to that.
Right.
And therefore, if anything threatens it, they will deal with it. And one of the beauties of the dramatic beauties that you get in I think the best kinds of these stories is that we see the individual and we know the individual, i.e. Chase, i.e. Crocker. And we see their lives and we know them as people. And we see their commitment to their work, i.e. through Chase, and their loyalty to the people who work for them, i.e. through Crocker. But at a certain level above them, they are nameless. There are people in halls of power who do not know their names and do not care. And if policy requires that this thing happen, and the thing happening means that a woman named Tara Chase is going to be left to die in Iran, too bad for Tara Chase, right? Because we can always get another one like her. And it's not that it's malicious. It's simply...
It's business.
Yeah, it is, and it's business in the most cynical sense. It is.
Right.
It's not business. It is the pure it's the pure scientific aspect of arithmetic.
Yeah.
Right? This is the calculation. You can look at it any way you want, but if these are all the numbers, then you're always going to get this result. You cannot get any other result. And we're sorry if you don't like the result, but that's the result. And the institution is not going to be inclined to change those variables, right? Whereas a Chase or a Crocker is going to be like, well, let's change the 3 to a 4, and maybe we get a different result. And the institution is going to be like, but we don't have a 4, we have a 3. That, to me, creates really, certainly a very compelling backdrop, if not a really compelling engine behind the stories. So,
yeah. So I have a question that I want to ask you. I have a lot of friends and family members who are, they're going to see these movies and say, "Hey, Greg, you read comics? Where should I start? What's good entry? Like, honestly, especially if I've just seen Days of Future Past,
right.
X-Men. My usual starting spot for them is Whedon's Astonishing.
Yeah.
Just because it's a fantastic story with great characters. But if you were to recommend, any publisher, what's a good, like, I'm new to comics, where should I start? What would be? And let's say that they're open for, any type of,
I mean, we're talking
yeah.
superhero comics?
Doesn't have to be. I mean, I know, like, I've recommended Sandman to friends and all, so just...
Yeah. I mean, the problem is that I would tailor that so much to the individual.
Right, exactly.
I think, for instance, I'm told a lot that people give Queen and Country to readers that aren't into comics, and that's been a good gateway drug. I understand that Gotham Central does the same thing because
it's kind of the Law and Order-esque of it.
Yeah, and it's understandable. It's an accessible.
I'm sorry. I did a disservice. Not Law and Order. The Wire. Sorry, there's a difference.
Yeah. No, I think Wire, or going back to that proto-genesis, Homicide, Life on the Street. Mm-hmm. I'm going to pitch my wife's work. I would think that Hopeless Savages is great entry for people, and I really do. I think, especially for young adults. You give them the Hopeless Savages, and they're in. By the same token, Raina Tegelmeyer's work, I think, is a great entry for younger readers. I really love what Brian is doing with the X-Men right now, and I think going back and starting at the beginning of that run, actually, it kind of chucks you in the deep end. But one of the things that Brian is very good about is using continuity when it matters, so you don't drown in it. I would, if I was talking to a woman who was like, this is all male boy stuff, I would point them to Kelly Sue DeConnick's Captain Marvel for superhero stuff.
So great.
Exactly.
So great.
If I was somebody who was like, well, they're, male, adolescent power fantasies, I would say, really? Here, take a look at this. And I would put Hawkeye in front of them. I really would, because that's going to blow, that would destroy preconceptions.
Right. And then sex criminals just to fuck with their minds.
Exactly. Or Saga.
Saga.
Which, all things that you can say about Saga notwithstanding, one of the things Saga does brilliantly is use the power of the medium, so that you are picking up a book that looks insane. It looks insane. And yet when you read it, everything that's going on is eminently understandable and relatable and personal and human.
Right.
It is emotionally affecting. If I would pitch my own work, I would say, I think Lazarus is very easy to get into. And as a quote-unquote non-superhero book, Yeah, I think there's a lot of muscle behind it. I think if you like crime, I would pick up Southern Bastards.
Yeah.
I think Aaron and Latour are just stunningly good. If you like art sci-fi, I would look at The Fuse.
Okay.
Which is Anthony Johnston and Justin Greenwood. I mean, the thing is, if people, there's so much.
Right.
The question is, what are you into? Do you want to read a spy story? Do you want to read a crime story? Do you want to read superheroes? Do you want to read more X-Men? There are many choices.
Right. It's not just capes and tights.
Yeah.
So.
And that's, I think, the most important sort of evangelism we can do is to make sure that people who are curious understand not all comics are Batman versus Superman or Days of Future Past. Regardless of the quality of that work ultimately, that's not what it is. So there's this big parade out there.
Oh, yeah. Another one I like to recommend is Planetary by Warren Ellis.
Yeah.
As far as just out there sci-fi, it's one of the most creative.
Yeah.
So.
And I have not read yet, but I understand that The Trees, which I guess comes out this Wednesday, is just amazing.
Yeah.
That is what I've been led to believe.
It is Warren Ellis.
Yeah. Well, we can all have a faltering step.
Fair enough, but
the problem. We never want to get to a place where we believe our own press,
Right. True.
That way, and death lies. So.
Cool. Thank you. I really appreciate the time. It's been a lot of fun talking with you, Jay, because I've really enjoyed your work. So it was a great opportunity.
It's been a delight, man. I really have enjoyed it.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. My name is Greg from the Game Fanatics. That was author Greg Rucka. Veil number 4 will be on the shelves shortly, as well as Cyclops and Lazarus are currently available. If you haven't read any of his previous work, I do highly recommend you check it out. Batwoman is one of my favorites, as well as some of the others. Until next time, read more comics.